Silas Ward had seen his share of scars in his 43 years gunshot wounds, branding irons, the jagged consequences of a hard land, but nothing prepared him for what he saw that morning. When Coraline reached up to dust the high shelf, the faded fabric of her dress pulled taut across her back, revealing a pattern of burns that made his blood go cold. Circular, deliberate, spaced with brutal intention. Someone had pressed hot metal against her flesh over and over. Without mercy, he stood in the doorway of his modest ranch house, frozen in place, staring at this quiet young woman who'd only been in his home for 3 days. Her movements were careful, precise, as if she'd spent her whole life trying not to be seen or heard, as though silence and invisibility were the only armor she had left. And now, with the morning light cutting through the dusty window panes, the truth of her pain was etched in full view across her shoulders, a story of cruelty. Too vicious for words, Silas cleared his throat gently, careful not to startle her. She spun around fast, hands flying to her collar, trying to cover what she must have prayed he hadn't seen. Her eyes, wide with panic, searched his face with the frantic intensity of someone who had been judged before, who had every reason to fear what came next. "Miss Lane," he said quietly, his voice low and steady despite the storm of anger rising inside him. "Those marks, how long have you carried them?" She stepped back until her spine pressed flush against the wall, her face paling. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Ward. I was just cleaning like you asked." But Silas had spent years reading wounded creatures, dogs caught in barbed wire, horses broken by cruel riders, men haunted by war, and the signs were all there. The guarded posture, the way she kept glancing at the door, the trembling in her fingers that she couldn't quite hide, and those burns, they were still healing, still pink at the edges, raw in a way that said the pain was far from memory. "They aren't accidents," he said softly. "Someone did that to you, on purpose, with something hot, something round." Cora's strength finally cracked, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if the boards behind her might split and swallow her whole. "Please don't send me away," she whispered hoarsely. "I can work. I won't make trouble. I'll stay quiet. I'll stay out of your way." The desperation in her voice struck him like a punch to the chest. This wasn't about finding a job, this was survival. She'd endured something horrific, and she was terrified enough to beg a stranger just to let her stay. Silas slowly set his coffee cup down on the side table with careful control. "I'm not sending you anywhere, Miss Lane," he said, his voice level, "but I need to know who did this to you." Her eyes darted to the window, scanning the distant horizon, as if expecting riders to appear over the ridge. When she looked back at him, her voice was barely more than breath. "You don't understand, Mr. Ward. If they find out I told someone, if they know you've seen." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. The terror in her eyes said everything. Silas sat down at the kitchen table while she lowered herself onto the chair across from him, hands trembling as she accepted the cup of coffee he poured. The silence stretched out between them until finally she spoke, her voice hollow, each word carrying the weight of someone who'd held this pain alone for too long. "His name is Malachi Brooks. He owns the Silver Dollar Saloon in town, the biggest one. He has arrangements with certain women who work there, girls who got nowhere else to go." Silas's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Brooks was infamous, a man who thrived in the gray spaces between the law and the shadows. Gambling, liquor, flesh. He trafficked in whatever paid well and corrupted faster. "He told us the burns were reminders," Cora said, still staring into her coffee like it held memories. "Reminders of what happens to girls who try to run, or talk, or don't follow his rules exactly." Silas studied her closely, the way she held her left shoulder slightly higher, how she flinched at the sound of boots scuffing the floor. She was a map of quiet survival. "How many others?" he asked. "6 that I know of," she said. "Maybe more." She looked up at him then, her eyes torn between fragile hope and sheer terror. "Mr. Ward, you seem like a good man, but Malachi Brooks has people in his pocket. Sheriff Dawson won't touch him. Judge Whitmore owes him money. Even the preacher, he just smiles and takes Brooks' donations. Nobody stands up to him." Silas walked to the window, eyes drifting over the land he'd poured 15 years of his life into, fences he'd built by hand, a roof he'd raised. After a storm ripped it clean off, this place was his, every inch earned with sweat and quiet dignity. But now, after hearing her story and seeing the evidence of that man's cruelty carved into her skin, something settled in his bones, cold, steady, and absolute. "How'd you get away?" he asked. "There was a fire at the saloon last month. Nothing big, kitchen stove caught some curtains, but it was chaos for a few minutes. I slipped out the back. Been walking ever since, staying off the main roads, sleeping in barns or under trees. Then I saw your ad for help in a paper to towns over. I thought, maybe I could start over. Disappear." She was still speaking when they both heard it, the sound that sent the color draining from her. Face.hoofbeats. Rhythmic. Fast. For writers. At least, Silas moved to the front window just as the figures crested the ridge above his property. Cora backed away toward the kitchen door, her breath caught in her throat. "It's them," she choked out. "He must have tracked me. He always said he'd find anyone who ran." The lead writer wore a long black coat and rode like a man who believed the world owed him deference. Even from a distance, Silas could see the arrogance in the way he sat his horse, like he owned everything his eyes touched. "That's Malachi," Cora whispered. "Mr. Ward. You don't know what he's capable of. He'll burn this place down with both of us in it just to make a point." The riders drew closer, and Silas could see the hard set of their faces, the guns hanging loose at their hips, the mean smiles they wore like uniforms. But what settled in Silas Ward's chest wasn't fear. It was fury, a quiet, unwavering fury that burned hotter than fire and colder than steel. "Miss Lane," he said, eyes still locked on the riders. "Go to my bedroom, under the bed. There's a wooden box. Bring it here." She returned just as the riders reached the front gate, carrying a heavy box wrapped in years of silence. Inside, folded in oiled cloth, was a well-kept Colt revolver and a leather holster worn from use. Silas strapped it on with practiced ease, his movements steady, deliberate. "You were a lawman," Cora said, watching him handle the weapon. "Deputy sheriff," he replied without turning. "To territories over. Before I came here." He flipped open the cylinder. 6 bullets, all there. "Some things," he said quietly, "you don't forget." Malachi Brooks dismounted with dramatic flair, his black coat flaring like wings. His men remained on horseback, hands never far from their pistols. Brooks was younger than Silas had expected, maybe 35, with the groomed polish of a man who never had to lift more than a glass. "Mr. Ward, I presume," Brooks said smoothly, his voice refined, practiced. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Silas stepped onto his porch, hands visible but ready. "I don't believe I do. Mr. Brooks, everything on this land is mine, earned honest, kept honest." Brooks smiled thinly. "Let's not play games." The girl caused a bit of a stir when she vanished. "My other employees worry for her safety, do they?" Silas replied evenly. "Funny kind of concern that shows up with guns." One of the riders, nervous, scarred, shifted in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we just take her and go. This one looks like trouble." Brooks ignored the man. "Mr. Ward, I'm a practical man. I'm prepared to offer compensation. $50. You can consider it the end of a misunderstanding." Silas's expression didn't change. "I'm not in the business of selling people." Brooks' smile vanished. "Everyone has a price. The only question is whether you're wise enough to take it." Silas didn't blink. Brooks gestured lazily toward the house, the barn, the pastures. "Shame if something happened to all this. Fires start easily, animals wander, accidents happen. Sometimes folks get hurt trying to save what's already lost." Silas stood tall, the revolver resting easy at his side. He'd spent his life carving something real into the dust, and he wasn't about to watch it burn for men like Malachi Brooks. "Mr. Brooks," Silas said evenly, his gaze locked on the man lounging near his gate. "You're welcome to try whatever threat you came here to deliver. But there's something you should know before you open your mouth again." His tone remained polite, almost casual, but beneath it ran a quiet, sharpened edge like the calm before a storm you didn't see coming. "That girl you're looking for," he continued, voice steady, She showed me what you did to her. The burn marks, all over her back. I've seen terrible things in my time. Men broken over money. Blood spilled over land and pride. But branding a woman like livestock, that's a different kind of evil. Brooks' smile twitched, faltering, just enough to betray the shift behind his polished mask. Careful now, rancher. Accusations like that could land you in serious trouble. Oh, I'm not accusing you, Mr. Brooks, Silas said, his voice lowering into something darker, more resolute. I'm making you a promise, the air between. Then turned taut, the silence stretching tight as a drawn wire. Behind Brooks, his men were stirring gloved hands inching toward holstered guns, boots shifting in dry dirt, but they didn't move. Something about the way Silas stood there, perfectly still and utterly unafraid, gave them pause. Without another word, Brooks turned and climbed back onto his horse, his coat whipping behind him like a shadow. He looked down at Silas one final time, his voice colder now. This isn't over, Ward, not by a long shot. As the dust from their retreat settled across the yard, Silas stepped back into the house and found Cora slumped at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. The confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but the weight of it pressed into the walls, into the very air they breathed. He'll be back, she said without lifting her head. Tonight maybe, tomorrow for sure, and next time. He won't come with just 3 men. Silas poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, the steam curling like smoke as he stared into it, already thinking ahead. Tell me about the other women, he said quietly, the ones still with him. Do they want out? Cora looked up, startled. Of course they do, but that doesn't mean they can. Brooks doesn't just control them, he knows their families, their kids. He tells them that leaving means someone else pays the price. What about proof? Has anyone ever tried to bring charges? Cora shook her head, frustration hardening her features. Sheriff Dawson won't even take statements, says it's hearsay. Judge Whitmore dismissed the only complaint that ever made it to court, called it lacking credible evidence. And the preacher? He just preaches forgiveness and deposits Brooks' checks. Silas turned to the desk in the corner of the room, pulling open the bottom drawer. He reached for a worn leather portfolio he hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters, certificates, and an old badge, its brass dulled by time, but not forgotten. Miss Lane, I want you to write everything you know, he said. Names, dates, what he did, where he did it. As much detail as you can remember. What good will that do? Cora asked, fear tightening her voice. The local law won't lift a finger. Local law, Silas replied, holding up one of the sealed letters, isn't our only option. I still have contacts in the territorial government, men who remember Deadwood Creek, men who trust my word when I say someone needs stopping. For the first time since the riders had left, a flicker of something like hope touched Cora's expression, quickly swallowed again by fear. If Brooks gets even a whiff of what you're doing, she warned, he won't wait for legal process. He'll come for you, for me, and he won't come to talk. Silas nodded, then moved to the cabinet behind the door. He unlocked it, pulled out a double-barreled shotgun, and handed it to her along with a box of shells. Can you use one of these? My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. Good, Silas said. Keep it close. Because you're right, he will come back, and when he does, we'll be ready. But even as the words left his mouth, they both went still. Faint voices, smoke-tainted wind, the low roar of fire from far off. Silas moved to the window, his jaw tightening. On the horizon, orange light flared too strong to be lamplight, too high to be a campfire. It was fire, real fire. And approaching fast through the darkening dusk came a lone rider, galloping hard. It was Sheriff Dawson. His horse was lathered, nostrils flaring, and his face, usually carved from stone, was lined with panic. He pulled up hard just outside the front gate, shouting even before he dismounted. Ward, thank God. We need every able-bodied man. The silver dollars burning, and it's spreading fast. Silas stepped onto the porch, Cora behind him, tense and watchful. How bad? He asked. Bad enough that half the business district could go up if we don't get ahead of it. The volunteer brigades stretched thin. Then Dawson's eyes landed on Cora, and his voice turned sharp. What's she doing here? She works for me, Silas said without hesitation. What started the fire? Dawson hesitated. No, one's sure yet. Brooks claims someone said it deliberately. Says someone with a grudge lit it on purpose. Cora gripped Silas's arm, her voice low and urgent. He's setting you up. He'll blame the fire on you. Use it to turn the town against you. But Silas was already moving, strapping on his gun belt, grabbing his coat. Miss Lane, he said, bar the doors, keep the shotgun close. He turned to Dawson. Let's go save what we can. As they rode hard toward the glowing horizon, Silas felt a cold knot of certainty forming in his gut. This wasn't just a fire. This was bait, a trap. And yet, sometimes the only way to catch a predator was to walk straight into the snare. By the time they reached town, the silver dollar was a blazing ruin. Flames roared into the night sky, sending black smoke curling over rooftops. Townsfolk scrambled in frantic lines, passing buckets from the well, faces streaked with sweat and soot. But something felt wrong. While others fought to save what they could, Malachi Brooks stood at a distance, calm, untouched, calculating. His arms folded, his eyes narrowed not with grief, but with quiet satisfaction. A man whose livelihood was burning should have been frantic. Brooks looked like a man who had just set the first match of a greater fire. Ward, he called, spotting Silas in the crowd. Glad to see your conscience caught up with you. Sheriff Dawson glanced sideways, puzzled. What's that supposed to mean, Brooks? Oh, you didn't know, Brooks said, his voice rising just enough for nearby townspeople to hear. Mr. Ward here's been hiding my missing employee, the one who disappeared the day before my place mysteriously caught fire. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the bucket lines. Suspicion bloomed. Silas saw it on the faces of familiar men, the blacksmith, the grocer, the banker's clerk. Good people, but wary, practical. People who knew Malachi Brooks could make life hard for those who crossed him. That's quite an accusation, Silas said calmly, especially considering your saloon caught fire while I was at my ranch with witnesses. Brooks shrugged. Witnesses can be bought, and a slow burn gives an arsonist plenty of time to build an alibi. The firefighters slowed. Eyes turned. Even Sheriff Dawson seemed unsure where his loyalties lay. Then a new voice rang out, sharp and defiant. That's a lie. From the crowd stepped a young woman, her dress torn at the hem, her eyes fierce. Silas didn't recognize her, but he knew the type. One of the saloon girls. One of Brooks. Malachi Brooks set that fire himself, she said, holding up a small glass bottle half filled with lamp oil. I saw him do it. He told us to get out the back door, then poured this all over the floor. Said it was time to clean house and start over somewhere new. The effect was electric. Brooks' polished composure cracked. Fury flickered across his face like a flare. His men began to move, pushing through the crowd, but they hadn't expected the townsfolk to rise. The blacksmith stepped in front of the girl. The grocer moved to block one of Brooks' thugs. Even the banker's skinny clerk stood his ground. Sheriff, Silas said quietly, I think that's more than enough to make an arrest. But Dawson's hand hovered uncertainly over his gun, and it wasn't aimed at Brooks. He was looking at Silas. The way I see it, Dawson said, his voice slow, uncertain. Accusations are flying all over. Best course might be to take everyone in, sort it out after, in the firelight. Silas saw Brooks smile. Then another voice cut clean through the tension. Sheriff Dawson, I wouldn't do that if I were you. The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward. Dust clung to his coat, and a silver badge caught the firelight on his chest. U.S. Marshal Thomas Crawford, he said, voice crisp and authoritative, and suddenly the balance of power began to shift. I've been tracking a string of crimes across 3 territories, Marshal Crawford said, his voice calm but authoritative, and my investigation brought me right here. Malachi Brooks, once so confident, now turned pale. He recovered quickly, trying to summon his old bravado. Marshal, whatever you think you know. What I know, Crawford cut in sharply, is that 2 months ago, a woman named Sarah Chen escaped from a similar establishment in Deadwood. She's been speaking with federal agents, she described, a network of men trafficking women across territorial lines, using threats and violence to keep them in line. She also described burn marks, marks just like the ones we've heard about tonight. Sheriff Dawson looked as though the ground might swallow him whole. Marshal, he stammered. I wasn't made aware of any federal investigation. You weren't supposed to be, Crawford said curtly. Operations like these rely on local authorities looking the other way. But 3 days ago, Mr. Ward here contacted my office, asked for federal assistance regarding suspected human trafficking. Silas blinked, momentarily confused. He hadn't sent anything, but then it clicked. Someone in the territorial government, remembering his old service and reputation, must have acted on his behalf years ago. He'd worked with federal marshals to clean up Deadwood Creek. Those memories clearly still carried. Wait. Betty stepped forward, still clutching the glass bottle with traces of lamp oil. Marshal, there are 5 other women still trapped in arrangements like mine. Brooks controls us by threatening our families back east. Brooks, trying to salvage what little control he had, sneered. I suppose you've got proof of these wild accusations, but the edge had left his voice. He could feel the tide turning against him. Crawford calmly reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder, thick with documents. Actually, he said, we do. Bank records, testimonies from 3 territories, and now a witness to arson and intimidation. Brooks' hired men grew restless. Their hands hovered near their guns. The townspeople sensed the shift. They began stepping back, forming a circle around the confrontation, creating a tense and dangerous space. Silas murmured to Crawford, he's got 3 men with him, all armed. They're getting ready. I see them, the marshal replied, without looking away from Brooks. Sheriff Dawson, he said loudly, I'm ordering you to arrest Malachi Brooks and his associates for federal crimes, human trafficking. Conspiracy. Dawson hesitated. His hand trembled over his holster. Maybe we should discuss this, but it was too late. Brooks gave a sharp whistle, a signal. No one's arresting anybody tonight, he snarled. One of his men drew and fired at the marshal. Silas had been waiting, his Colt cleared leather in a blink, and his shot struck the gunman in the shoulder. Spinning him around, the weapon flew from the man's hand, landing in the dirt. The street exploded into chaos. Crawford dove behind a water barrel, drawing his revolver as he rolled. Dawson, finally forced into action, went for Brooks, but was tackled by another of the thugs. Betty screamed and bolted toward the general store, clutching her evidence. The townspeople scattered, some running for cover, others fleeing the street. But over the gunfire and shouting came a sound that froze everyone, the thunder of hooves. A fast-approaching group. Silas squinted into the firelit dusk, uncertain if the riders were reinforcements or another ambush. But as they drew closer, he recognized Cora Lane at the front, riding hard with 3 women behind her, former saloon girls who had been hiding in the hills. Waiting for a chance to come forward, they dismounted without hesitation, stepping into the chaos with fierce determination. We heard the shots, Cora shouted, taking cover behind a wagon. Are we too late? Marshal Crawford, crouched behind his barrel, called back, right on time. Can any of you identify this man as Malachi Brooks? That's him, one of the women said without hesitation. She was older, her voice lined with steel. And I've got the scars to prove what he does to women who cross him. The weight of those words broke something in Brooks, with 2 of his men down and Dawson finally acting like a lawman wrestling the third to the ground. Brooks found himself surrounded, but he wasn't ready to surrender. You think this ends anything? He shouted, backing toward the burning remains of the saloon. There are men like me in every town from here to California. You take me down, and 3 more will rise in my place. Marshal Crawford stood, his gun still trained on Brooks. Maybe, he said, but they'll know what happened to you, and that might make them think twice. Brooks' face twisted into something feral. I'll burn before I hang. That's your choice, Crawford replied evenly. But it wasn't Crawford who ended it. Betty stepped forward, still holding the scorched evidence bottle in her trembling hands. Her voice was calm, steady, cutting through the smoke and noise like a bell. Mr. Brooks, you told us we were nothing, that no one would believe us, that no one cared. She held the bottle up, the firelight glinting off the remaining film of oil. You were wrong, and in that moment, something broke in Malachi Brooks. The fury drained from his eyes. He looked around at the faces women he had brutalized, townspeople no longer cowed by fear, a marshal representing the justice he thought untouchable, and a sheriff who had finally remembered what his badge stood for. Marshal Crawford stepped forward. "Malachi Brooks, you are under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy arson, and attempted murder," as dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Silas Ward sat on his porch beside Cora Lane, watching the sky bloom with gentle colors. It was a strange contrast to the violence of the night before. Peace always felt quieter after chaos. "What will you do now?" he asked. Cora leaned back, gazing at the horizon. Marshal Crawford said the federal government helps women like U.S. help finding family, job training, relocation if needed. She hesitated, then added softly, "But I was thinking, maybe you still needed some help around here. Just until I figure out what comes next." Silas smiled. The place had been too quiet for too long, and there was plenty of work to go around. "I reckon I could use the company, Miss Lane. The job's yours for as long as you want it." Far off, the marshal's wagon disappeared into the distance, carrying Brooks and his men to face justice. The nightmare was over, and for the first time in a long while, both Silas and Cora could breathe easy. Sometimes, standing up to evil was exactly as simple and as hard as deciding that some things are worth fighting for. And sometimes, when good people finally found their courage, justice won.